So welcome to the new edition of the Experience Exchange sessions that we hold with our guests from the IEO community. And today we have a very special guest, Germano, who has been with us since the very inception of the IEO in multiple roles, and he succeeded in all of them. So currently, Germano represents the executive board as one of its members, and he also is responsible for the OpenTrack part, which we will focus today. But to give the floor to Germano, I would also ask him to introduce himself in multiple roles that he's trained himself in before. Tell a bit about his background and why initially he came to the IU and what he did for the project. So Germano, welcome to the Experience Exchange and share your expertise with us, please.
Hello there. Okay, the question about background is a very simple question with a very complex answer from my side. The IEO entered my life before it existed in a way. Back in 2017, I was very disappointed with the state of higher education in Brazil, and I wanted to escape. So I escaped for 50 days, and I went on what I call a grand voyage, covering the Baltic states, Russia, as far to the east as the Republic of Tuva, and then back to Central Russia and Ukraine. A year before that, I was perfecting my Russian language, which when I was a high schooler, I had studied out of my own curiosity, not within the school program, just with a private teacher my mother found, my mother herself being a language teacher. And it had been left at that. I had a bit of Russian as far back as 2010. And in 2016, I had this idea for the trip. The trip happened a year later. So I had a year to relearn the language, perfect the language, learn the culture much better, try to get some contacts before even setting out on the trip. And all of this was very successful. But how did I do it? I was already kind of had exhausted the possibilities that simple language courses could give me in Russian. So I had the idea of taking courses about other things that interested me in Russian. So I found this course on Coursera about LaTeX, the document writing programming language, taught by a person we now know very well, Mr. Daniil Fyodorovich, the president of the IEO, also a lecturer in the Higher School of Economics in Moscow. So I took that course. I was very impressed by how inspired it was as an e-learning product. And I decided to contact the man behind it, just send him a cold message on Facebook or Contacti, I don't even remember. And he answered. And now I've done this in many settings with many people, like these sorts of just reaching out messages. Most of them have answered, but I think Daniil's answer has been the one that has shaped my destiny from then on the most. And the destiny is, as it turns out, of perhaps tens of thousands of people across many countries. Let's go back to my grand voyage. I was already coming back from the Eastern Steppes to Moscow. And I remembered Daniil. And I sent him another message. Hey, I will be in Moscow in the 20th something of August. Are you around? Maybe we can go out for some coffee. He said, no, I'm not around. I'm some 1,000 kilometers to the south, running the summer school in economics, Lash. And I thought, and I think he made an invitation, or he implied an invitation. And I was like, 3 a.m. train, arrived there at 11. I need to take a taxi to the venue, that's another hour, 12. And the only train back so I can make it in time for my next flight on my trip, I would need to take the 6 p.m. train, 1800 hours train. So I would have 4 hours at the most optimistic at the venue. All my friends in Moscow said I was crazy. All my friends in Moscow told me to go to sleep. Plot twist. Germano did not go to sleep. So it all happened. And this story is quite long, and I can get really excited in telling it again and again, which makes me probably kind of an old man already, repeating stories. So the rest of the story, if it whet your appetite, will be hopefully in the end entry of this interview.
But the story resulted, as we know, in the International Economics Olympiad.
And the Brazilian Economics Olympiad.
Yeah, which is amazing. Like the very first national selection created because of the IEO, I guess, right?
Well, yes and no. For IEO documents, I'd say yes. But for the dignity of the Brazilian Economics Olympiad as a sovereign institution, I'd say no. It has its own purpose within Brazil, even if the link with the IEO, God forbid, were to be severed. Because it has become an ecosystem of its own in the country. Although I'm not actively working there anymore, I feel the legacy we have built. And those of my friends who were co-founders still remain. And the spirit is very well alive, and it has grown larger and better than in my time. So institutions that last and create a legacy are a thing that I value very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's certain. And now you work as a more international specialist, I would say. You represent the executive board, which is an international body within the IEO, and you also organize an international competition as part of the IEO, which is called the OpenTrack. But could you please, for our viewers, explain what the OpenTrack is?
Before we get to the OpenTrack itself, let me just say a few words about the international idea. Yes, I call it, and I even have it as a motto, truly international. That was something that I was going for both in my professional life and my personal life when I began the Grand Voyage, although maybe I wasn't consciously aware of it yet, or I didn't have a clear idea how to realize it in a responsible way. But yes, both in my life philosophy and in my professional life, I go for the truly international way of being. That has been a family value as well. We're all quite international. And thankfully, it's formally also represented in most of us having multiple citizenships, which is really nice. It's good hedging for a very uncertain world. But on the OpenTrack, I've had at least 7 years to think of a good definition for the OpenTrack. So many iterations, many of them built through infighting in a good way within the organization. And I think the best, most beautiful and laconic definition for the OpenTrack that President Daniel has helped in crafting is the OpenTrack is the mirror image of the IEO available for everyone. So it is as far as possible in maintaining the prestige of the main IEO competition being worth medals, certificates, and many other external rewards for participants who take national selection. The OpenTrack has the same content as far as we can reproduce it in an online-only format, the same atmosphere, the same cultural events, the same opportunities for networking, and the same opportunities for growth as a person. So if you take the OpenTrack, you can expect to be held to the same high academic standards and high moral standards of competition as the, well, we'll call it main track, the main IEO. But the good thing is that not only 5 of you can participate, but all of you. If you are a high school student, or if you're not a high school student, when I say everyone, I mean everyone, regardless of age. We've had parents participating. We've had very experienced teachers from countries participating to see what the IEO is all about. So the OpenTrack is also a way of active observation. It organizationally, it bridges the gap from you being a complete outsider to our community to having at least some link, some way of exchanging ideas and experience with us. In this way, I also, when I was a kid, and now I'm a big kid, I used to play all sorts of strategy games where you build civilizations. The OpenTrack is my little real life civilization that I built, and it's like it's not the whole civilization. The whole civilization is the IEO as a whole, but the OpenTrack is kind of the city of inventors where all the crazy scientists live and work and create things that they then offer up to the big civilization. And we have this very good position in which we can try things because the stakes are lower in the competition. So we can try things around that maybe in the main track we have to move more slowly because it's worth a lot. It defines the destiny of the students. The open track, less so a bit, as far as external rewards go. So we can be more inventive.
And I should confirm that actually the impact of the OpenTrack is invaluable indeed, because for many countries where the IO is not, well, yet here with the national selection represented, and students do not travel to the IO from those countries, they can still join the OpenTrack and try themselves as the competitors of this huge event. And also, in some countries, there are so many good students in economics, and only 5 of them go to the main track, but the rest will go to the OpenTrack and check their knowledge within the same atmosphere and within the same tasks ecosystem. So that helps a lot for new countries, for example, to try themselves and see how they result. And for the contestants who could not get selected to the main track, also to check their knowledge and get inspired to get selected in the future.
Exactly. Well, we're actually using this as an advertising point that we began last year, the 5 versus infinity. We make a huge slide with the question, how many people, how many students per country can join the IEO as part of their national team per year? The answer is 5. Next slide. How many can join in the open track? And it's a big infinity sign.
Yeah.
Also, I agree that the open track is a tool of soft power for the IEO, if you will, because that way we can expand in new countries. New countries begin to be aware of us through their students. Sometimes these students are organized by schools or teachers, and they come with some structure. And here I must give context that when you register as a contestant in the open track, you can either register with a preformed team of your own friends or schoolmates or organized by some organization. And we're now we want to re-implement the role of mentor or teacher, following our close brothers from the Winter Challenge. And or you can just register and as an individual and trust us that we will find a good team for you, at least for the business case, because the business case is the team round, whereas in the open track, economics and financial literacy are just individual rounds. And then you will have ventured out alone into a new place and will leave that place with new friends, at the very least, and new knowledge.
Yeah, well, the promotional line is just amazing. I must admit, I would be inspired if I were just a student and, well, possibly a national organizer also. And, well, actually, how did you become involved in the open track? And what is your current role here?
It was COVID 2020. Full uncertainty, at least the first round of huge uncertainty that we faced as an organization in the IEO. And I remember Daniel, the president, wrote a post in the forum. And I remember the first name that what became the open track had in that post, out of competition participation. And he had this idea, why, since we're stuck in an online format, why not make the best use of it and scale up and allow anyone to participate in a separate ranking? And he approached me privately and gave me that link to the post and said, "Oh, Your support would be welcome to that idea. And by support, he probably meant, oh, just like and comment and such things. And one thing was that in Brazil, most of the Olympiads under the umbrella of Instituto Vertri, that still has some link to the Brazilian Economics Olympiad as far as I know, all of them had, by default, by standard, this open category in which anyone could participate. So for me, it sounded natural. I was amazed that, well, it did sound natural, but on the other hand, if we look at how international Olympiads historically developed, the funnel is already resolved at the national level by the time the students reach the international level. The teams are already formed. So that's why probably it didn't happen to any of us in international Olympiads that an open category could be implemented. COVID had to happen for someone to have that idea. And Daniel had that idea, and I supported that idea in theory because I was experienced with that in Brazil and it seemed natural. But then the secretary of the IEO approached me privately. And I'm still scared to this day of the answer that I gave. His question was, would you like to implement that in the IEO? And my spine ran cold. I sweated cold, but I said yes. And that again has defined my destiny in a very strong way.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. Yes, actually, we're very happy to have you organize this huge.
Famous last words, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
kind of.
but you asked what my role is. Well, in the spirit of playing around with civilizations, we play around with our titles a lot. So nowadays, I am governor and first officer. Governor meaning the role as an executive board member that I assume in representing the interests of the OpenTrack within the IEO as an organization, which has been a huge learning experience for me, and I'm sure we'll get back to this in the interview. And first officer being the person who is responsible for all the executive processes. So in corporate speak, which I dislike, a CEO, and the first officer, and governor would be president, owner, I don't know, project owner in Scrum terminology. But we'll get to the organizational part, to the organizational structure of the IEO OpenTrack, I'm sure, very soon. And then I'll have a slide, not a slide, but something better to show you.
Yeah, that's something that I wanted to ask you about, the organizational structure of the team. You mentioned yourself as a first officer, but what other roles do you have? And how do you work effectively as an online-only team?
Let's fire up the second screen. May I?
Yeah, you have access.
Okay. Okay. Right. I love my org charts. And this org chart has been also the fruit of many iterations and some experimenting and some playing around. So what are we looking at? The first officer, as I said, is the person who orchestrates all the processes of the OpenTrack as a project, as an event that happens every year, as a seasonal project, if you would. And I thought long and hard about how we divide roles in educational events. And I came to the conclusion that academics, for all the content, the tests, the platform, well, the use of the platform as far as e-learning goes, the results, the quality control of grading, all these things can go under the umbrella of what we call academics. Communications, what happens before the event, outreach. We need to get the word out that this thing exists, that this thing is very cool, and it's not easy. But potentially we have the whole world as our audience. During the event, we have one-way communication with our contestants, meaning we give announcements, and two-way communication with our contestants, meaning we both give them support, we moderate the chats, and we chat with them as well, because we're also people, or so it So some people believe that organizers are also people. And operations. Operations is all about structure. The platforms as well, information platforms, databases. We are very proud that we use quite advanced and sophisticated database operations to manage the huge amount of information that is a massive online open Olympiad, or MOO, if you will. And operations has been a very strong backbone of this structure. I myself, if I were to pick which background I am closest to, I come mostly from an operations background. My first background was in computer engineering. Now it's turned to geospatial engineering, which feeds completely from computer engineering, but also has a geography aspect to it, which also explains perhaps my love for cultures and languages and meaningful travel and the whole, captain thing atmosphere that I put out there. And what do we mean by officers? Well, if we pause and think about the C-suite, CEO, CTO, COO, CFO, most people pay attention to the letter C, chief. Now, I take the letter C out on purpose. But what's the last O? Most people forget. It's officer. So although there is a bit of a military nautical kind of like metaphorical lining that I put here on purpose, it's also perfectly organizational. And so these 4 to 5 officers, because we also can take a trainee per year, work very closely together, and they are all by definition leaders. Although the first officer has prerogative organizationally and is usually more experienced and has responsibility over all the line officers, still they are being trained to be leaders at all times. In every word and every work, they are trained to be officer first and specialist second, meaning they need to have a view of the big picture of what's happening, both in the IEO OpenTrack as a project, as an executive thing that repeats year after year, and as an institution, as part of an even bigger institution that's the IEO. So since historically I have been governor for all the years and first officer for all the years, and this year it's going to be the same, although every year I say is my last. It has become a very funny tradition, and every year is not my last so far. Officers are trained to be leaders. They are trained so they could potentially replace the officer that's up here, that's higher up relative to them. But we're not all officers here because there is lots of work to be done. For example, we have many tests to grade, more than the main track. We have business cases, the same business case. And this is also a very strong technological victory we've had in the OpenTrack with great help from Daniil and Christos in the academics department. Peer grading. We have successfully implemented peer grading for what would be the groups round in the main track. In the OpenTrack is the peer grading round. And that can scale indefinitely up. So now we have cases to the tune of hundreds, potentially. We could go thousands easily. Tens of thousands, perhaps less easily, but also possible. Then the top N teams, N has usually been 8 or 10, reach the final. And we have a jury, and we have a rule for this jury that they have to be IEO alumni. So the IEO alumni who were judged yesterday are judging today. They make this jump. They jump the barricade that separates a contestant from an organizer, and they come to see how things look like from the side of the organizers. For them, it's usually a life-changing experience, and often one of their first professional roles, especially in education. What other tasks? Outreach and social media. Here we've experimented with volunteers, but usually they haven't made much of a difference. So we're mostly uh, intensifying our focus on good social media management strategies. And we've made strides since last year with our new communications officer. And this year we'll actually have the time to do things more calmly because we plan to open registration early. We plan to stretch the whole calendar to begin earlier so we can do all the things more calmly. The things that benefit from slow mode will have this time to grow this time. And logistics and technology. Well, here I could also add proctoring. On the first years, we had proctoring, a more low-cost version of the very strong proctoring made and done in the IEO by Anna herself here. We had a lower cost alternative that was developed in the Brazilian Economics Olympiad and the Brazilian Linguistics Olympiad, also as an emergency during the first year of COVID. And we kind of implemented that here in the IEO OpenTrack as well, at least on the first years. But then we realized the presence of proctoring wasn't protecting much. The marginal gain from proctoring was not high enough to justify having it and having these proctors who were paid by the hour. So we basically put proctoring on hold, and what we do security-wise is at the grading level. We compare tests very well, and it's really obvious if someone tries to cheat, and well, we take measures. Let's leave it at that.
How many
And
cases per year? I'm very sorry to interrupt, but it's just very interesting to me as a proctoring person at the IEO. How many cases do you normally, notice while grading per year?
I think it's in the level of high units or low dozens, so 7-ish, 5-ish, 10-ish per year, considering we have a pool of effective contestants around 300 to 500, and that's set to grow. So mostly we appeal to the contestants' integrity, and if they cheat, we just say, you're making a fool out of yourself, bucko, because you're only fooling yourself. Hey, it's an open track. What are you wasting your time here? So we have this both good cop propaganda and bad cop propaganda that we use to disencourage cheating very strongly, and it usually works on them. They're young and impressionable. They're even most cheaters are not bad, they're just misguided, and we try to guide them well because this is meant to educate them for life as well. Again, we had the tasks and who can perform these tasks. First and foremost, we appeal to IEO alumni because I personally position the IEO OpenTrack, and that's the title of this interview that I really begged Anna to accept, the IEO OpenTrack as an academy of alumni. We take this very academically strong workforce and give them their first real professional experience. In that sense, it's an academy because it educates them in how to perform work, because often it happens that their life so far as excellent school pupils has been very much just perform school tasks and excel at them. But how do you make the jump to the real world? So we position ourselves as a place where you can make this jump to the real world. You will be very well supported by our officers, and you will be very safe in making mistakes. And we also highlight that a mistake is not the end of the world, which is often a problem for these overachieving school children. They fear mistakes so much. And the open track as a workplace is the place where they make their first mistakes and become proud of it. Next, the IEOX community as a whole. Now I must make the disclaimer that the IEO OpenTrack is not an IEOX project per se, because it's closer to the core of the institution. If we imagine the IEO institution as this very beautiful classical building that I use as an emoji all the times in the chats, then the IEOX community for me is the beautiful garden of trees around it. But the IEO OpenTrack team resides in that classical building, not in the garden. Although our actions make the garden more beautiful, that's for sure. And the broader economics public. Anyone who is involved in economics education potentially could be part of our workforce as well. And if we take a look a little bit from afar, you see everything is color coded. Every color, every little glyph, everything here has meaning. But I'll leave the mythology of the OpenTrack perhaps to later in the interview, or you can find me and ask me, and maybe I'll answer.
Well, I like both your metaphors and, well, the structure, which is complex and clear at the same time. So that makes a lot of sense.
The minimum complexity necessary for the institution to be the minimum complexity necessary for completion. At least we try.
I also had lots of questions about motivation and the system, but you actually explained almost it all while talking about the structure. But I also got one question about how do you recruit those students and how do you promote the idea of working with you, and how do you then select those students who will join you as officers or, well, other types of workers?
The first OpenTrack had basically a handpicked team by me. I myself was handpicked by Alexander under an idea by Daniil. I don't consider myself the founder of the OpenTrack. It's even codified in our specific regulations that the president and the secretary are the founders. But the first, even before there was an officer corps, before we had a structure, because 2020 was tough. We don't talk about 2020, is the insider joke. I had a handpicked team, and they weren't necessarily IO alumni. Some of them were my partners, for example, from sister Olympiads, such as the Brazilian Linguistics Olympiad. Some were members of the Brazilian Economics Olympiad team. Some were even Brazilian Economics Olympiad alumni who were not IO alumni. And one of them has risen through the ranks from my right-hand man to officially a second officer after serving all the years as operations officer. A shout out to João Pedro. But then as we gained structure, I started thinking that we should prioritize IO alumni whenever we can for the key roles, because they will grow. The roles will grow with them. The roles will evolve with them, will be shaped with them, and they will outgrow their roles. They will go to even stronger leadership roles. And we'll have this kind of evolutionary structure in which we are always forming people as professionals. And here, let me just zoom in to the officer reserve. What is an officer reserve? If a person who worked as an officer is no longer able or willing to work, we invite them to remain in the internal channels and keep their access to most of the internal team structures without obligation to work, just so their institutional wisdom that they accumulated during their time remains with us, and themselves as people whom we love remain with us as well. So this has been a mechanism that may be easy to miss, but it's actually very effective. Sometimes reserve officers come after years and give an idea, and we're like, okay, that changes, that solves the problem we were banging our heads against.
Well,
so about recruitment. The first years were very much handpicked, but and then we got some structure. So now each officer is potentially responsible for their little section here. So the academics officer is responsible for finding a big enough and talented enough and credentialed enough team of graders and jury. Graders are for economic, well, we kind of make this distinction. Graders grade economics papers, and the jury judges the business case. We call them two different things because they're two different sub-teams within the academic section, although they may overlap. People may be doing both things. Currently, the communications officer and the operations officer don't have teams of their own, but in the past, historically, we have had a team of outreach volunteers and a team of operations proctors. So potentially, the structure allows for it, for each officer to have their team. And the first officer will usually coordinate the officer here. And the officer here will organize their team. So they are entrusted with this responsibility. They're not micromanaged. They're overseen by the first officer. And as far as recruitment goes, you can see we have an open vacancy here and a few candidates already, and an open vacancy here and a few candidates. Since last year, we began writing formal role descriptions for each officer role, including their compensation, their expected workload during the various phases of organization, which we'll get to as soon as we scroll right on this Miro board. And but since at least 2021, we've had interviews. They were less formal, but they're more formal now, in which the first officer and the governor, potentially these could be two different people, although I'm wearing both hats now, and the outgoing officer in this role can sit and interview an officer candidate, and then we make a decision. It was mostly word of mouth now, but in 2022, it was very pleasant when I approached a potential person whom I had headhunted as a possible good academics officer, and that's Alexander Lutsenko, now in reserve. And I said, I may have work for you if you're willing. And he was like, oh, is that the role of academics officer in the OpenTrack? And I said, yes. And what made me so happy is that the roles themselves are becoming known beyond the people, which shows how an institution matures and gives it lots of staying power. So about recruitment now, we usually go down the network, beginning here, then here, then here. Sometimes an officer has a direct responsibility to recruit. Recruiting officers still has this headhunting and handpicking element, less so than in the first years, but still we patrol all the chats of IEOs, winter challenges, and essay challenges, and we pay attention and we watch them and see, okay, this one fits the bill. They have the attitude. And then we put them on our little secret list. And then we run a very fair and transparent selection because we invite everyone whom we think is fit for a certain officer role. Although we do filter the role, like we think matches them the best. But first we give them a tour of everything, which is actually going to happen today after this interview for one person.
Well, that sounds like a very well-organized process. And as to the atmosphere within the OpenTrack, I think as a workplace, it sounds like a very supportive and respectful place to be at.
It's a very respectful team, very organized. It does have a vertical chain of command that I insist on. That's my somewhat military side. But the thing is, it has integrity. So as humans, we're all equal. As functions, one must salute the rank, not the person. But as soon as the hats are off, we're all friends and equals. And yes, we are explicitly committed to each other's growth, especially coming as higher up as you are. The higher up you are, the more you must commit to the growth of those whom you serve by leading.
And how long do normally your officers last? Like, do they take part in multiple seasons, or they perceive it as like a seasonal job for like 1 year to grow and then move on to different projects?
Usually, I actually ask them uh, whether they have already been onboarded or before the interview, do you see this as a seasonal job, a one-off gig that you're going to do, or are you with us for more than one summer? Uh, so far, I think no officer has stayed only one summer.
Mm-hmm.
So at least two. Well, João Pedro has been from the very beginning, from prehistory in 2020, because historical records begin in 2021. We're not sure how we survived 2020. I have also been from prehistory. We have had three different academics officers across 6 cycles. We are now on our second communications officer, and operations officer is an open vacancy for the first time because João Pedro has accepted a promotion to second officer.
Mm-hmm.
So second officer, well, it has trainee here. He needs no training. He has been second officer even when the name didn't exist. But the thing here is, as I mentioned before, we have a kind of a trainee slot per year. And here we can take a person who is fresher and train them in academics, communications, or operations for 1 year. And it's called an ensign, and I'll give that word in writing. It's a historical military officer term as well. For very, very young officers, they were actually minors in the British Navy and the British Army, I think, of the Napoleonic era, and we use this name. So they spend 1 year being, for example, we had an academics ensign, Shimon Florek, who then rose to academics officer and is now in reserve.
Mm-hmm.
So he spent 1 year learning how to be an academics officer with Alexander Lutsenko as academics officer, and of course myself mentoring the mentoring. And then they kind of graduate and they get their alpha, Xi, or omega glyph, and they're now kind of qualified to be officer.
Mm-hmm.
And their qualifications remain even if they enter reserve, because technically they can come back out of reserve and work another year if they want. Most of the times they don't. Reserve usually means they have grown in life and have a higher trade-off to being available for the IEO during a summer.
Yeah.
Um, so yes,
Well, if
basically
yeah.
more than one, usually more than one cycle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds great. And I also like a lot the idea of reserve because, well, it looks like a very good idea to implement this kind of pool of workers because even if they don't come back, as you said, they grow in life and they might become supporters of the open track later in life. And well, just for them staying in touch, keeping in touch with you, makes them like part of this community, which is good both for them, for staying with you together, and for the project itself, because well, probably later in life they can help in some way.
Although they don't have an office in the main beautiful classical building anymore, they are just hanging around in the garden and they will remain in the community. That's the community building aspect of it. Because we're building a beautiful community of people who are, in their great majority, excellent, interesting, and nice to be around, and whose interests revolve around knowledge in economics and other aspects. And they may know people who may be interested. So again, the wheel turns forward with water
Mhm.
from this. Let's add a river to the garden and a little wheel.
Well, the metaphor becomes just better.
Yes,
Whatever
we
way
built the
you say.
metaphor.
Yeah, I like it a lot. And well, looking forward to the future, or looking ahead, I'd say, to the future of the open track, what do you aspire from it? Like, what is the nearest future or the faraway future? What do you want from the open track to happen?
Let's say I've had an existential crisis per year or more about the open track and myself in the open track and myself in the IEO. But recently, now don't write these words in stone. Recently, I have realized that this thing only makes sense if we look really long term. Although the short term is actionable, the long term, we can think one generation, two generations in the future, and of the OpenTrack as a very strong part of the IEO ecosystem.
Mhm.
First and foremost, the OpenTrack for me has been a huge learning experience at all times. It still is and still will be in what has been codified as intrapreneurship, being an entrepreneur inside of an organization. We'll have links to these concepts in the text because I actually have the links open and you can't see my tabs because I have good tab discipline for Zoom. Uh, and it has taught me to, and I used to, I let's well, okay, one step back. It has taught me to defend a, a project within the organization I work in. So again, this role of governor, which I actually made a role 2 years ago before it was kind of rolled into first officer. And first officer was called project lead. And I thought that name was too vanilla, so I had to invent something, right? And it became first officer. And governor. Now, why did I add a governor? Because there has to be someone who accumulates this institutional wisdom and is willing to give direction to the open track within the IEO. Just like the president of the IEO does for the IEO as a whole, the governor of the open track does for the open track. These things are linked.
Mhm.
And of course, you can see the hierarchy president for the big country and governor for the city. The open track is a city. And we have a concilium, which is an advisory board. So it kind of has president and executive board, big IEO, governor, and concilium, open track. The the structure mirrors a bit the governance structure of the IO. It's a little bit more executive and less deliberative because we have this fast-paced element here, but we have slow mode. We have slow institutional building mode that happens year long, not only the fast mode running the whole show thing. So to answer the question, finally, short term, our weakest link has been outreach. That's why we're extending the calendar to begin earlier, so we can do both fast-paced targeted outreach and slow-paced, more foundational outreach, which is a great idea from Alexander that we kind of began to do last year, but just didn't have the time. Reach out to each national competition slowly, talk to them, learn, listen twice as much as we speak, learn what their national competition is like, and then explain slowly again what the open track is, because we think most people don't know what the open track can offer. And they definitely don't know that not only like a second team from student number 6 to student number 10 can join the open track, but actually everyone in their country can. Not only even finalists, but really everyone, even friends who hadn't participated in the National Olympiad. And that's something we have to explain very slowly. And I know that because I've had to explain many things of the open track very slowly within the IEO so people will understand. And it was a learning process for me because now I realize in other organizational settings I participate and serve in that even your closest colleague, like your closest equal colleague at your side, is not fully aware of what you're doing in your project.
True.
And this slow mode part has been very game changing for the better to consolidate the OpenTrack within the IEO.
Mhm.
And long term, I model the OpenTrack to be the innovation hub of the IEO.
Mhm.
Not the only one, but perhaps the main one so far, because we can afford to invent things. And I'll find, I'm not going to show it here, but we can add as an attachment. We once made a list of all the inventions that began in the OpenTrack and were to some extent implemented in the IEO as a whole. And the list has more than 10 entries over
Mhm.
6 years. So we have that going for us. That's quite a nice number. So Innovation Hub for the IEO and Academy of Alumni. Many of our alumni, whether as officers or even as jury members, head of jury, or just a humble grader. And imagine, to be a humble grader in the IEO, you need to know a lot. And it's the most like line-like of tasks, the most conveyor belt kind of task. They are impacted by the work they do. It's usually something they put on their CV, on their LinkedIn, like, wow, I did this thing.
Mhm.
So the academy thing really works as a direction of growth, of organic and foundational growth for the OpenTrack in the IEO as a whole. The IEO creates alumni and the OpenTrack puts them to work. And it's quite unique as far as international Olympiads go. I don't think I've seen anything similar in another Olympiad.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
we have a very unique ecosystem. We have very creative governance in the IEO, and this makes it a truly inspiring place to be for myself, which is why the existential crisis have left for now. And I think you will still see a lot of me in the IEO over the next decades or centuries
Yeah, I'm
on
so
my
glad
lane.
to hear it. Yeah, centuries. Yeah, that's very promising. I hope for decades at least, but still being realistic. And well, actually, everything that you said sounds extremely inspirational for both. If I were a national organizer, I'd be inspired by your speech, and I would certainly launch an alumni academy of my own. Just well, invite students that participated in the Olympiads before to join the competition organization within the current year. But if we sum up your experience and just form it as a tip for the future national organizers or the current national organizers who don't do this kind of procedure, they don't invite alumni to participate. What would you say to them? Why it is important in the first place, and what are the major factors that they should keep in mind while launching this kind of initiative?
Well, full disclosure, uh, nobody here in the OpenTrack is working for free. We have a budget, and most of this budget goes to salaries. Now, salaries. You can't really maintain a person for 12 months, so it's a commission pay. You get paid once per year for the work you do, and we have a very codified system of indices. You see these little numbers next to the officers. These are their work pay in indices per year. One index is by definition the pay an officer receives per year. Now, this funding has historically come from the central office because the central office, and still does, funds the OpenTrack directly. But now that we have a more structured legal presence in the world as an institution, with a legal person and a bank account, I am hoping at the governance yellow level and the command purple level that we may do some creative fundraising to raise the budget of the OpenTrack to be able both to afford better salaries because the salaries are good. They are below market rate for the kind of work done, but everyone is so impassioned by the work they do that we don't really mind. It's more of like an extra thing, both internal and external incentive. But without the external incentive, it will be much harder to keep this level of strong talent around. But we're hoping, and at the executive board level, I would feel it needs to be very carefully discussed at the executive board level, but that we can have some more ways of raising funds for such projects. And we have more projects, more open competitions, such as the Winter Challenge that actually ended today. I was in the jury, and the teams had some really strong cases, really impressive work. And the Essay Challenge, that's also a new project that's quite exciting and quite unique. I also had the chance to look at some of their essays.
Mhm.
So hopefully this whole fundraising part will evolve because we are such creative governors of an Olympiad. Otherwise, now we must make some efforts in this as well,
Mhm.
including both high scale and low scale donations. Why not? There are many officers and line workers here that are well, the officers know they're paid, but the workers here not always. It's usually kind of a pleasant surprise for them. And last year, when they were finally paid, they were like, "Oh, I didn't know. Could I donate it to the IEO?" And I said, "Unfortunately, we don't have a structure in place for small scale donations. So pick the charity of your choice. I'll transfer your money there, and I'll give you the receipt."
Mhm.
Meaning, we can direct donations from our own workers potentially to the IO, which would be a very easy to implement potentially source of small scale fundraising.
Mhm.
Imagine what we can do large scale. So for national Olympiad organizers, my advice maybe is consider whether a fully volunteer organization is the best way because you will retain talent from year to year and thus institutional wisdom if you can at least give them something for their work. It doesn't have to be money, but for example, our own very explicit mentoring and community placement is already something of value we can offer back and something that gives fruit both short term and long term. This sort of networking, more than networking, a sense of belonging, a sense of sometimes finally finding the friends you had been looking for all your life, people similar to you, of similar values.
Mhm.
But at an executive level, I also understand that we can have a pool of volunteers. We've experimented ourselves. In our case, not very successful. And I know many uh, organizers of national Olympiads have a core team that's backed, sometimes by government, by university, and so on. Sometimes it's a project within their job, as is the case of Latvia, a country I am very familiar with, that I call my home and may be my home long term, which has an Olympiad that's one of the oldest ones, far, far older than the IEO. So imagine how much institutional wisdom is there. And each national Olympiad is very different. And this diversity makes us all the stronger as a network. So I have very little direct executive advice. So maybe my advice is more philosophical. But still, philosophy is good, and philosophy is the reason I'm even able to create these things and co-create these things.
Mhm. Well, sounds quite inspirational. And well, to continue with this motivational part, could you please tell us what the Open Track taught you as a person, how it impacted your
Patience,
development? Yeah, very good outcome.
lots of patience, patience with my dearest colleagues, patience with students, but also within this patience, a way of solving conflict situations by diffusing them before they start.
Mm-hmm.
A way of being very assertive in my language, although without using any aggressive terms at all. Truly like being water. So, and the importance of calm, sustained work. If you were a little fly most internal chats of the OpenTrack, you would see a lot of emoji oceans and a lot of videos of the Baltic Sea lately. Uh, I'm usually not a person of the current thing. Most of my cultural references are 4,000 years old, but I recently bought a book called Slow Productivity, and I'm not sure it's appropriate to show it on the screen, but I'll do it anyway. And I have to unblur myself or I have to play around with the camera. It's visible. See, I've just begun to read it. The cover is sublimely beautiful. It's a landscape.
Mhm.
And I'm looking forward to see what's in here because it may be things that my team and I has discovered like in parallel before reading. But we have gone this way of calm, sustained foundational work. We're very fast when we need to, and we play around that. We have Athens mode for slow mode institutional building and Sparta mode for executive work when every second counts, like during the IEO.
Mhm.
And I think we have struck a balance. And I actually have a good feeling about this year and the next years. And for me, the open track has been, well, my whole. I used to have a national mandate and I discontinued it explicitly to remain consistent with my international ambitions of being truly international. And so I kind of became a freelancer. I was the first freelancer in the IEO executive board. Other colleagues followed in their freelance format. Some of them even like came to me for advice. But the open track has given me a very solid, like potentially permanent if I wanted to, because no one wants to replace me, although I want to be replaced eventually. A mandate, a niche in the IEO as an ecosystem.
Yeah, well, thank you for this comment. And in addition to this book recommendation, is there anything else you would like to say for the conclusion?
Absolutely. We didn't get into it explicitly in this interview, but every single thing I do and teach involves servant leadership. Each officer, when they're being onboarded, receives that text and is expected to read it. That's a text you read and reread, and most importantly, you should try to apply in your life and in your profession. And there is always place for it, even if you're not in a formal leadership role yet or ever. And that's something I will absolutely share. Servant leadership is the root of everything that we do.
And thanks again for this interview. I think it's extremely inspirational and it gives a lot of, well, material for thinking. So I believe it will be extremely useful for anyone watching it.
Thank you for having me today and always. We
Thank
also go a long way back since the very beginning.
Yeah.